The landscape of Zorathian 5 looked like it had been shredded by a god. Craters scarred the plains in every direction. Burnt-out gunships lay tilted on their sides like broken insects, and the ruins of Outpost Theta 9 smoldered in silence. It was late afternoon, but the sky was black with smoke, lit in bursts by scattered fires still burning through shattered infrastructure. Nothing moved. No birds. No machines. No soldiers. Until Derek Vance climbed over a twisted steel support beam and scanned the scene ahead. Derek moved with purpose, but not haste. He was tired, physically and mentally. His recon unit had been ordered to search the perimeter for survivors, intel, or anything salvageable after the surprise orbital strike 2 nights ago. Earth Command's local authority had collapsed, and most of the remaining troops had fallen back to the fortified line 5 clicks south. But Derek had stayed behind, not because he was ordered to, but because he had to be sure. He was 35, a seasoned Earthborn recon officer, former Special Forces. He'd seen action across 3 systems and had the scar across his ribs to prove it. He didn't trust politicians or war room commanders. He trusted what he could see, what he could touch, and what he could save. He adjusted the strap on his rifle, wiped sweat from his forehead with a gloved hand, and pressed forward through the debris. Every step crunched against the powdered concrete and fused metal shards beneath his boots. His matte gray combat suit clung to his frame, half unzipped at the front. The heat made it unbearable to wear fully sealed. His body was covered in streaks of ash, dirt, and dried blood from the earlier skirmishes. A low-grade headache pulsed behind his eyes, courtesy of near exhaustion and the stench of oxidized fuel. Derek turned a corner near what used to be the eastern wing of the outpost and paused. He heard something, faint, muffled. A whimper? He stayed still, letting his instincts sharpen. He knelt and listened. There was again weak, intermittent, coming from beneath a collapsed wall. Not wind, not metal. It was someone. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb the structure. He crouched beside a jagged column and peered into the gap below. Eyes. A pair of violet, terrified eyes stared back at him. It took him half a second to register what he was seeing. A girl. Small frame. Dirty skin. Torn clothing. Alien. Thalkai. She was wedged between slabs of concrete and the remnants of a ceiling girder, too weak to move. Derek exhaled slowly. Shit. Her people were supposed to have evacuated hours ago. The Thalkai delegation had been stationed here for diplomatic purposes, observers during the treaty negotiations with Earth Command. But everything had gone sideways. Fast. Thalkai were a matriarchal species, highly telepathic, bred for diplomacy, not combat. Derek had seen them in the field, tall, graceful women with pale skin and almost ceremonial armor. They avoided direct confrontation, always escorted by armed guards from allied factions. This girl had none. No backup, no weapon, no strength, just blood-smeared silver robes clinging to her bruised body. She looked young, barely more than 20 by human standards. She must have been left behind when the structure collapsed during the evacuation. She blinked slowly, tears pooling in the corners of her eyes. Her lips trembled as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. She was too dehydrated, too afraid. Derek dropped his rifle and crouched low, hands up. Don't move, he said calmly. You're trapped. I'm going to help you, all right. Her body tensed. He saw her shiver. It wasn't just the pain. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. To her, he was a soldier, armed, dirty, male, and human. Everything about him was wrong to her instincts. Suddenly, her eyes widened. A jolt of heat shot through Derek's head, quick, sharp, like a pulse of static. A telepathic reflex. He saw flashes, not images but raw emotion. Fear, abandonment, pain. Her world had collapsed, and all she had left was the terror of being found by the enemy. He winced, steadying himself. Easy, he muttered. You're bleeding. If I leave you here, you'll die in a few hours. You know that. She blinked again, slower this time. A trace of hesitation in her stare. Derek checked the beam, pinning her leg. Crushed ankle. No bone protrusion, but swelling, deep bruising. He could lift the beam, but only once. would have to act fast. I'm lifting this. It'll hurt. Then I'm pulling you out. You either trust me, or... He didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to hear it. She gave the slightest nod. Derek braced his arms, gritted his teeth, and heaved. The beam groaned, but shifted an inch. That was enough. He dropped to his knees, slid his arms under her, and pulled her free in one fluid motion. She gasped sharply, her fingers gripping his vest like claws. Her body convulsed in his arms, but she didn't scream. He stood up, carrying her close to his chest. She weighed almost nothing, too light for someone her age. Malnourished, probably hadn't eaten in days. Her voice finally came out. Just a breath. "Hurts. I know," he said. "It's over. You're out." He didn't go back to the surface. Instead, he moved quickly through a ruined access corridor and into the underground level, where emergency med bays were once used to treat Earth Command personnel. Most have been stripped clean, but Derek had stashed supplies there 2 days ago, just in case. He kicked the access panel and stepped into the dim, sterile space. The air was cooler, clean. Battery-powered overhead strips cast a pale glow across the white walls and floor. He laid her gently on the med bed. She didn't resist. He stripped his gloves and reached for the med kit. She flinched as he approached. Her hands clutched the torn remnants of her armor, as if trying to preserve what dignity she had left. Derek paused. "I need to see the injury. That's all." She stared at him again, eyes narrowed, but she let go. The ceremonial armor had once been regal, woven silver bands with radiant glyphs. Now it was torn, charred, fused to her skin in places. He clipped it away from her ankle, working fast, hands steady. The injury was worse than he'd thought. Deep tissue trauma, internal bleeding, but it was treatable. He cleaned the wound, injected coagulant, then foam-packed it with stabilizers. She hissed in pain, but didn't cry out. After wrapping her leg, he covered her with a thermal blanket. She curled slightly, eyes on him the entire time, unblinking, still unsure. He sat on a nearby crate, removed his helmet, and rubbed his temples. Silence stretched between them. Then her voice came again, soft, strained. "You could have left." Derek looked at her. "Yeah. Why didn't you?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I don't leave people behind. Doesn't matter what species." She didn't speak again for several minutes. Eventually, her head lowered onto the medbed cushion. Her eyes closed, her body relaxed, and Derek watched her, trying to ignore the part of himself that already felt responsible for her survival. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know if she'd live past tomorrow. But somehow, she wasn't the enemy anymore. Not to him. She was someone who had been abandoned, and he wasn't going to let that happen again. The med bay remained quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the emergency lights. The power cells hummed low in the walls, barely enough for life support, lighting, and basic diagnostics. Outside, the battlefield had gone still, but the air vents occasionally sucked in whiffs of burnt metal and ash from the collapsed surface above. Derek sat on the floor beside the bed. His back leaned against a cold cabinet. His legs were stretched out, boots still covered in soot. He hadn't slept in almost 30 hours, but he didn't want to leave her side. He didn't trust the structure overhead to hold, and he didn't trust Earth Command to keep this place quiet for long. The outpost was a ruin, but it was still a strategic location, and that meant sooner or later someone would come looking. He glanced at the girl. She had fallen into a light sleep, her chest rising in shallow breaths beneath the thin blanket. Her face looked younger without the fear contorting it. Delicate features framed by strands of pale violet hair matted to her cheeks with sweat. One hand rested near her ribs, trembling occasionally, fingers twitching as if caught in half-conscious instinct. She was still in pain and still vulnerable, but she was alive. He checked her vitals again on the manual med scanner. No fever. Stabilized pulse. Blood oxygen rising. She'd pulled through the worst of it. For now. He stood slowly and walked to the supply locker. Inside, half a dozen ration packs remained, along with 2 emergency water canisters and a roll of thermocloth. Not enough for a long stay. His mind started calculating. If he carried her and moved slow, he could reach the fallback zone in just over a day. But if enemy patrols were nearby, or if Earth Command picked up his transponder, they might assume he was helping a hostile. Protocol was clear. All alien elements left in a red zone were to be treated as threats or left behind. He didn't care. As he opened one of the ration packs and poured heated broth into a flexible cup, he heard a sound, soft and alert. He turned. She was awake. Her eyes scanned the room, slower this time, more aware, less panicked. They stopped when they landed on him. She didn't speak, but her stare was more direct, measured. Derek approached the bed and crouched again. He offered the cup. She hesitated. "It's safe," he said. "Human food, but it'll help. Mild protein base, nothing toxic to your kind." She took it with both hands, careful and tense. Her fingers still shook, and her first sip was cautious. She went slightly, then drank more. He sat back. A few seconds passed. "I'm Derek," he said. No response. "You speak standard. I heard you earlier." She looked down. Then, quietly, "Valari." He nodded once. "Valari. You remember what happened?" She blinked. "Collapse. Fire. My guard's gone." "You were under the East Dome. Structural breach. They evacuated too fast. No one checked." He shook his head. "They thought it was a total loss. No survivors logged." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did, something between resignation and shame. She looked away again. Derek leaned forward. "You're not a soldier." She met his eyes. "No. Envoy class. Diplomatic caste. Second daughter of Speaker Vera." That explained it. The armor. The lack of training. The hesitation. She was never supposed to be near combat. She was a political asset sent to represent Thalkai interests, a symbol of peace. And now she was trapped behind enemy lines with a human soldier feeding her soup. Derek watched her finish the cup. Her voice was low when she spoke again. "You didn't turn me in. Didn't see the point. I'm your enemy. You're not holding a weapon. That doesn't matter to your command structure." Derek didn't argue. She was right. Earth Command had grown increasingly paranoid since the collapse of the truce on Galvin Station. Every alien interaction was logged, flagged, and interrogated. "Then why?" she asked again. "Why are you still here?" He paused. The question hung in the air longer this time. "I've lost enough people," he said finally. Didn't feel right leaving another one behind. Her lips pressed together. Her hands folded around the empty cup in her lap. "I felt you," she said. "Your mind. When you touched me." He looked up sharply. "That wasn't intentional." "I know. It was raw, unfiltered. But I saw it." She hesitated. "You carry pain." Derek shifted his jaw slightly. "Most of us do." "Guilt." "Yes." "For what?" He let the silence build before answering. "For not getting to the last evac site in time. 27 people under my command. I was too far out. They died waiting for me." Valari didn't speak. Her gaze lingered on his face, but she didn't pry. After a moment, Derek stood again. "You should rest. You'll need your strength. I'm planning to move us before dawn." She frowned faintly. "Where?" "South perimeter. Earth fallback zone. It's risky, but it's better than staying here. They won't accept me." "No, but they'll accept me." She exhaled slow. "You would lie for me?" He looked at her and answered without blinking. "If I have to." Valari lowered her gaze again. Her face was unreadable now, but her shoulders had lowered and the tension in her hands had eased. Derek stepped to the side and sat back down, this time closer, not just guarding her, but watching over her. A long moment passed. Then she said almost to herself, "My people thought I died. They ran. You didn't. I couldn't. You still fought to stay alive." "That's not strength," she whispered. "That was fear." Derek's voice was quiet. "Sometimes it's the same thing." For the first time since they met, Valari didn't look afraid. Not entirely. And as the low hum of the med bay filled the space around them, Derek realized something important. He didn't feel alone for the first time in weeks. The war still raged above. Orders still waited to be broken. But in this small, broken shelter beneath a ruined battlefield, two strangers had found something rare. A reason to keep going. The emergency lights inside the medbay dimmed to their lowest setting. A power-saving sequence, automatic and quiet, signaled the approach of planetary night. Above them, the surface of Zorathian 5 had grown colder, darker. Satellite comms were down. Recon beacons silent. Whatever remained of the larger battle had moved elsewhere, but the outpost was still cut off, still forgotten. Inside, Derek finished repacking his gear. He'd stripped it down to essentials: water, nutrient packs, first aid supplies, and a portable field stim. No heavy weapons, just a sidearm. He would need one arm free to carry her. Valari sat upright on the bed now, propped against the wall. Her injury had stabilized, though she was still too weak to stand. Derek had fashioned a makeshift splint with foam, plastic fragments, and adhesive banding. It wouldn't last a long march, but it would hold. She watched him silently as he tightened his boots. Her gaze was clearer today, more focused, more calculating. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had been replaced with something else. A controlled caution, a diplomat's instinct for measuring intent. "You haven't contacted your command," she said. Derek paused, then zipped his pack. "No, you're AWOL. Technically." "Why?" He turned to her. "Because I know what happens when they find you." Valari looked down at her hands. "They'd interrogate me, detain me, or worse. You're a political figure, a bargaining chip." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, you're risking court-martial." Derek shrugged. "Won't be my first reprimand." He said it like a joke, but there was no humor in his voice. Just fatigue. Valari shifted under the blanket. Her leg twitched, and she winced, but she didn't complain. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly. "You said you weren't ordered to stay behind." "I wasn't." "Then why did you?" Derek didn't answer right away. He walked to the supply locker and pulled out the last water canister. He unscrewed the cap, took a sip, and passed it to her. She drank slowly, keeping her gaze locked on him. Finally, he spoke. "I saw too many left behind in the last campaign. Some of them ours, some of them not. Didn't sit right. Not anymore." "You still believe in the war?" "I believe in people. Sometimes." Her expression changed. Slightly. Enough for him to notice. A flicker of something less guarded. She leaned back. "My sister, Kilira, she was supposed to be with me. She arranged the Thalkai presence on this planet. Said it was critical to establish trust. She sent me here as a symbol." Derek nodded. Then the orbit strike hit. "Yes." "Where is she now?" Valari hesitated. "Safe. Likely evacuated to orbit before the collapse." "You think she knows you're alive?" She didn't answer. Her silence said enough. Derek checked his wrist scanner, battery low, but functional. He tapped in a quick pulse sequence. A red grid of the surrounding terrain lit up, displaying elevation changes and heat signatures. Nothing moved. No patrols. No drones. A narrow corridor of relative safety led through the shattered ridge southeast. He lowered his arm. "We'll move at dawn. There's a comms relay 4 clicks from here. If we get there, I might be able to call in a private extraction without alerting command." She frowned. "A civilian ship? Technically a freelance pilot who owes me a favor. It's not official. It's not safe. But it's the only shot we have." Valari's voice dropped. "And if they track the signal? Then we disappear before they do." She gave a slow nod. Then she leaned forward slightly. "May I ask you something?" "Sure. What happens after that?" "After we escape?" Derek exhaled. He knew that question was coming. He didn't have a rehearsed answer. "We figured out," he said plainly. "One step at a time. That's not a plan. It's more than I had yesterday." Silence returned for a long stretch. The low buzz of the power core pulsed in the wall behind her. Valari shifted again, her leg now wrapped in the folded thermal blanket. Derek caught her glancing at his hands, his fingers scarred, knuckles calloused from years of use. "You've killed before," she said. "Yes." "Did it ever bother you?" He thought about it. Not about the action, but the aftermath. The silence after a fight. The faces. The ones who deserved it. The ones who didn't. "Sometimes," he answered. "More often lately." She held his gaze. "That's what I saw in your mind. Not violence. Not pride. Just weight." Derek didn't flinch. "You don't read minds without permission?" "No," she said. "But pain doesn't wait for permission." The words hung between them like a lone note in the air. She had seen something in him, and now, whether he liked it or not, the ground between them was more than shared rubble. It was mutual exposure. "You need rest," he said, standing. Tomorrow's not going to be easy. She didn't argue. She eased herself back onto the pillow. He adjusted the blanket again. This time, she didn't pull away from his hands. As he turned off the overhead light, leaving only the wall strips glowing faint blue, Valari spoke once more, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. I don't want to die out here. Derek paused, then looked at her through the low light. You won't, he said. But even as he said it, he knew tomorrow might make a liar out of him. Still, he made a choice. He wasn't walking away, and neither was she. Dawn came late on Zorathian 5. The sky didn't brighten as much as it thinned, the thick atmosphere and drifting smoke dimming everything to a muted steel blue. Through the cracks in the collapsed ceiling, filtered light crept into the med bay and illuminated the dust suspended in the air like a slow, silent snowfall. Derek Vance stood at the rear exit of the underground corridor, scanning the path ahead with one knee planted on the ground. His wrist scanner displayed faint movement signatures in the distance, but nothing immediate. No thermal pings. The route to the relay station, 4 clicks southeast, was still clear. But time was short. If Earth Command resecured this zone, or if Falkai recovery units returned, they'd both be classified as liabilities. He as a deserter, she as unauthorized cargo. He returned to the med bay and knelt beside Valari. She was already awake, quietly adjusting the straps of the makeshift sling he'd constructed. Her breathing was steadier, skin pale but dry. Her leg remained immobile, wrapped in a padded sleeve reinforced with synthetic struts. The bruising had spread, but the swelling had started to recede. She moved with more coordination now, each motion precise, like she was trying to make up for lost time. But there was no masking the pain that followed every shift of her hips or jaw. You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt, Derek said as he adjusted her field harness. Valari glanced at him. It won't change anything. No, but it helps me track how far you can be pushed. I can walk if I have to. You won't. I carry you. You keep your mouth shut and your head down. Sound fair? She gave a small nod, her face unreadable. He strapped a sealed ration pouch to her side and checked her hydration tube. Then he crouched and held out his arms. She hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, she already had multiple times, but because of what it meant to be held like that. By a human, by a soldier. She adjusted her stance, then reached for his shoulder, allowing herself to be lifted again. Derek stood with a grunt and balanced her weight evenly across his torso. She was lighter than he remembered. His grip adjusted instinctively, one hand supporting her legs, the other across her back. She leaned her head slightly into his shoulder, not out of comfort, but to conserve strength. As they moved through the narrow passage and into the open air, Valari's breath caught. The outpost had changed. The fires had died, leaving only husks of buildings and exposed skeletons of walls. Smoke hung low over the field like a curtain, obscuring the sun. Bodies, some burned beyond recognition, lay half-buried in ash and metal debris. Broken mechs jutted from the ground like collapsed monuments. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Derek adjusted his pace. She felt him tense under her. His mind had already started running calculations. Distance, cover, line of sight, fallback options. She could feel it in his breathing. Valari, though trained in diplomacy, had rarely been this close to the realities of war. She'd read about battlefields, studied them in simulation. But this was the aftermath. The part no one wrote about. The silence. The emptiness. The sickening stillness after thousands had screamed, bled, and vanished. Do you ever get used to it? She asked quietly. No, Derek replied. You just get faster walking past it. They followed a cracked transport route, weaving between shattered vehicles and dislodged barricades. Derek took frequent pauses, checking their surroundings, listening. Valari remained quiet. She understood now that silence wasn't avoidance. It was survival. 2 clicks in, a half-collapsed service dome came into view. Derek stopped beneath its steel awning and set her down gently. He pulled a thermos from his pack and handed her a protein drink. She drank, eyes on the skyline. Do you think anyone else survived? From the outpost? Maybe. Most evac during the first wave. She turned to him. In your unit? He paused. They were stationed at the western gate. It took a direct hit. I never found any bodies. Then you don't know for sure. No, he said. But I know what kind of heat hit them. Nothing survives that. Valari didn't push further. After a short rest, they moved on. The terrain grew rougher. Trenches, craters, ridgelines. Derek's movement slowed as they navigated the broken path, carefully keeping to shadows and low ground. His stamina held, but she could feel his breath deepening. Not fatigue exactly, but the kind of weariness that ran deeper than muscle. He'd been running on adrenaline and purpose for days. And now, that purpose was her. They reached the relay station 2 hours later. It had been built into a reinforced bluff, half embedded in rock, half exposed to the east. The main dish was damaged, but one of the backup panels remained intact. Derek set Valari down in the narrow shade of the structure and checked the signal port. The console flickered to life. Weak but functional. He connected his scanner, overrode the standard encryption, and uploaded a short-range distress ping on a frequency only one person would recognize. What if they don't answer? Valari asked. They will. You trust them? I trust they owe me more than I owe command. She looked up at him. How do you explain this? Me? I don't. The console beeped twice. A signal locked. Response pending. Valari looked around. What happens if this doesn't work? Derek tightened his grip on his sidearm. Then I improvise. Minutes passed. Then the console flashed green. Transmission received. Approaching. Derek's jaw tightened. He checked the beacon ID. It's him. Valari leaned her head back against the stone, closing her eyes. Her body had stopped trembling. Her voice was steady. Why do this? She asked. Really? Derek sat beside her. You want a strategic answer? No. The real one. He hesitated, then looked her directly in the eyes. Because I know what it's like to be left behind. And I know what it's like when someone doesn't. Valari said nothing for a while. Her fingers brushed her splint absently. My sister won't understand. Then explain it to her. She'll think I've been compromised. Maybe you have. Valari turned to him. Have you? He held her gaze. Maybe I have too. The sky rumbled faintly. Far-off thunder, or maybe the arrival of something fast and unregistered. Valari didn't look up. She just reached over and placed her hand lightly on his. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't a plea. It was agreement. They were both already too far in a turn back. The sound came first, faint at the edge of hearing, like wind shearing against metal. Derek stood, eyes locked on the sky as the low thrum grew louder, steadier. The kind of sound that didn't belong in this silence. Then, over the ridgeline, the shape emerged. A compact shuttle, a Mark 8 Razor Claw, descended with slow precision, its nose angled slightly toward the eastern slope. It wasn't military issue, but it was fast and heavily modified. Derek recognized the retrofitted thruster arrays and uneven hull panels. It was exactly what he expected from Maddoxry. The landing struts hissed as the ship touched down on uneven ground 30 meters from the relay station. The engines cycled down, but didn't shut off completely, ready for a fast liftoff if things went south. The boarding ramp opened with a screech of old hydraulics. Derek helped Valari to her feet. She leaned on him, her injured leg stiff but functional enough to bear a fraction of her weight. They made their way toward the ramp slowly. No one exited the ship. At the top of the ramp stood a man in a black coat, tall, shaved head, gray beard trimmed close to his chin. His right eye was covered by an old tactical lens, the kind military courts had banned years ago for its black market upgrades. Maddoxry. Vance, he called out, arms crossed. Didn't expect you to actually pull the favor card. Derek kept his grip firm on Valari and stopped halfway up the ramp. You said if I ever needed extraction, you wouldn't ask questions. Maddox glanced at Valari. His mouth twisted slightly. That her? Yes. She's Thalkai. I know. Maddox stepped closer, lowering his voice. You bringing me a prisoner or a diplomatic bomb? She's neither. She's with me. That's not what Command's gonna see. I'm not asking Command. Maddox stared at him for a long second, then stepped aside. Get in. We're airborne in 30. Derek helped Valari inside. The shuttle was cramped and smelled of scorched oil and insulation. He led her to the med bunk, strapped her in, then sat across from her as Maddox sealed the ramp behind them. The ship lifted off hard, inertial dampeners lagging by half a second. Valari tensed but didn't cry out. For the first few minutes, no one spoke. Then Maddox's voice crackled through the intercom. Got a long-range ping headed this way. Military signature. You didn't leave a trail, did you? No, Derek replied. Well, someone sure as hell noticed your distress signal. Valari's eyes flicked to Derek. Will they track us? Maybe, Derek admitted. But I encrypted the beacon. Could be a patrol. Could be luck. Do you believe that? No. The comm crackled again. You've got maybe 10 minutes before someone notices a ship took off from a restricted zone. Where am I dropping you? Derek glanced at Valari. Off-grid. Somewhere unmonitored. Maddox cursed. That's a short list these days. Then pick a long one and burn the logs. Valari lay back against the med bunk, her face pale. You're not going back, are you? Derek looked at her. There's nothing to go back to. She hesitated. And me? He leaned forward. You're not cargo, Valari. You're not leverage. You're a person who got abandoned. Same as me. I didn't save you to trade you for favor. I did it because it was right. She blinked, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure until now. Sure of what? That you wouldn't change once the danger passed. I didn't change, Derek said. I just stopped pretending I had to follow someone else's code. She reached for his hand again. No hesitation this time. But before she could speak, the ship jolted violently. Maddox came over the comm again. We've got a tail. One fighter. Tag reads Earth Command Interceptor. They must have picked up the launch signature. Derek stood and grabbed the emergency support rail. You can lose them if you can buy me 40 seconds. Ow! The aft turret's manual. Derek didn't hesitate. He moved down the corridor and climbed into the turret housing. The interface was basic. Manual trigger, analog display, low precision. But it would work. The interceptor screamed into view, a sleek gunship designed for speed, not endurance. Derek rotated the turret, locked on, and fired a burst. The recoil jolted his arms. The enemy ship veered but didn't retreat. The next 20 seconds were chaos. Derek firing, Maddox jerking the shuttle through sharp turns, the hull groaning under the strain. Finally, with a last hard bank into a cloud layer, Maddox shouted over comms. They broke off. We're clear. Derek slumped against the seat and exhaled. Back in the cabin, Valari was still strapped in, her hands gripping the frame tightly. When Derek returned, she looked up, a mixture of worry and disbelief on her face. You fought your own people, she said. They weren't my people anymore. She studied him, truly studied him for the first time, as if trying to memorize his face. Where will we go? She asked. Derek didn't answer immediately. He sat beside her, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes for a moment. Well, they won't find us, and where no one will care that a human and a Thalkai broke the rules to stay alive. Her voice dropped. That sounds like nowhere. His reply was calm. Then we'll build it. Outside, the shuttle streaked through the clouds, leaving a war zone behind them, and carrying the fragile beginning of something that should never have happened, but now could not be undone. The planet was called Rollins Drift, a small, forgotten rock orbiting a cold red dwarf. It wasn't listed on most star charts anymore. Officially decommissioned decades ago after the mining guilds pulled out. Now, it served as a refuge for those who didn't want to be found. Drifters, smugglers, deserters, and the people who had nowhere else to go. Maddox dropped them 2 clicks outside the main settlement. No landing pad, no records. Just dirt, rock, and rusting infrastructure under a pale orange sky. Derek helped Valari down the ramp slowly. The dry air caught in their throats. The wind smelled like iron and dust. I'll swing back in a week, Maddox had said, if you're still alive. Then he lifted off without another word. They moved slowly down a narrow trail flanked by jagged cliffs and half-dead foliage. Derek carried the pack. Valari leaned on a short walking brace fashioned from the shuttle's interior tubing. Her leg was healing. Still stiff, still painful, but the worst had passed. The settlement came into view like a wound in the land. Low, blocky structures surrounded by makeshift towers and solar fences. No flags, no names, just power lines and movement behind slit windows. Inside, the people didn't stare. They looked, registered, then turned away. That was how things worked here. If you didn't cause trouble, you weren't asked questions. Derek knew the type. He'd lived among them before, on worlds like Crixus, Norn Prime, and Arvac Station. They found a unit on the south side of the ridge. 2 rooms. Power still worked. Plumbing didn't. The walls were cracked. It was perfect. That night, Derek rigged a heat lamp and unpacked what supplies they had left. Valari sat on the edge of the cot, watching him from across the room. Her face looked different in the lamplight. Less alien, more defined. She wore a plain tunic now, gray, loose-fitting. The ceremonial remnants of her Thalkai robes had been folded and stored away. For the first time, she looked like someone starting over. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. Derek didn't turn. "Miss what?" "Being part of something official. Wearing the uniform." He paused. Then, "Not anymore." She considered that. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." "You survive," he said. "You build a new pattern. A different reason. That's easy for you. You were a soldier. You had function. I had orders. That's not the same thing." She stood slowly and limped across the room, careful with her step. When she reached the table, she placed her hand lightly on it for balance. "I was trained to negotiate, to read people, to manage their fear, their pride, their instincts. Now, none of it matters." Derek met her eyes. "It still matters." "To who?" "To me." She looked away, unsure how to answer. Later, they ate in silence. Basic rations, no seasoning. Warm, but flavorless. Valari didn't complain. Her appetite had returned, small, but consistent. Derek watched her closely, not as a protector, but as someone who had come to rely on her presence. Her voice, her insight, the way she challenged him without trying. As night deepened, the wind outside rose. The metal walls groaned. The old power grid flickered once and settled. Inside, the two of them shared the same room, separated only by a fabric curtain Derek had pinned up between their beds. Valari lay back and stared at the ceiling. The stars outside didn't shine clearly here. The dust and sky interference made it impossible. She missed the stars, missed the shape of her homeworld's constellations. "Can I ask something personal?" she said into the dark. "Go ahead. When you carried me out of the rubble, what did you see in me?" He was quiet for a moment. "You looked like someone who had already decided to die." "I had, but you were still breathing. That was enough." She rolled on her side, facing the curtain. "Did you feel responsible for me from the beginning?" "No," he said honestly. "Not in the way you think." "Then how?" "I felt like if I left you, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." Silence returned. But this time it wasn't empty. It was full. Unsaid things. Thoughts that didn't need to be spoken yet. Then Valari whispered, "Do you still feel responsible?" Derek's answer came slowly, firmly. "No. Now I just want you here." She didn't reply. But a few minutes later, the curtain between them swayed gently, then moved aside. She stood there, quiet, steady despite her limp. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She walked to his bed, sat beside him, then lay down slowly, careful not to touch it first, just close enough to feel his presence. He didn't move, just reached out and placed a hand gently over hers. They stayed like that, close but still, unsure of the lines between comfort, trust, and something deeper. In the silence of that small, broken room on a forgotten planet, two fugitives from two worlds began to understand what it meant to choose one another, not out of survival, but out of something far more dangerous: hope. 3 days passed in relative quiet. Derek and Valari settled into the rhythms of life on Rollins Drift. Early mornings repairing the roof, ration runs to the depot at the center of town, and short walks outside the settlement walls to keep Valari's leg from stiffening. She was healing faster than expected. Not just physically. She moved with more confidence now. She no longer wore the expression of someone waiting to be hunted. Derek noticed the change. He didn't say out loud, but it showed in how he watched her. Less like a soldier guarding an asset. More like a man letting himself hope again. On the 4th morning, everything shifted. They were walking back from the pump station, sharing a half-filled canteen, when Derek spotted him. a tall, heavy-set man standing near their building's entrance. He wore a patched-up jacket and dark goggles, one hand resting on the grip of a sidearm. Local enforcer. Not official law, but the kind of man who made himself useful to whoever ran the underground market. He looked at Derek, then at Valari. Then he spat in the dirt. "You didn't say you brought a Thal Kai." Derek stepped forward. "I didn't say anything. She'd been talking to the girls at the depot," the man said. "Asking questions." Someone recognized the skin, the eyes. "Then I looked up your name." "Careful," Derek warned. "Don't need to be careful. Just need to know what you're planning. Because if Earth Command gets wind that you've been hiding a diplomat-class Thal Kai noble, this whole hole gets burned from orbit." "She's not a threat," Derek said. The man pulled a comm device from his belt. "Doesn't matter. You brought heat. I'm giving you 1 hour to leave." Valari hadn't spoken. She stood slightly behind Derek, chin raised, hands relaxed. Her body showed no fear, but her eyes were locked on the man's. Derek didn't blink. "We don't want trouble." "Then don't bring it here." The man turned and walked away. Derek and Valari said nothing as they went inside. Once the door closed, he locked it, reinforced it with the steel bar he'd salvaged from a junk generator. Then he sat. Valari stood in the middle of the room. "I shouldn't have spoken to anyone," she said. "No," Derek said. "You should have been able to." She crossed her arms. "I didn't tell them who I was. They didn't need you to. People like him, paranoid, desperate. One hint, and they see ghosts." She moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. "We can't run again." Derek leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We might not have a choice." She turned to him. "What if I talk to them? Convince them I'm not what they think?" He looked up. "You think reason works with someone who sees you as a problem to be removed?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm tired of hiding." A long silence followed. Finally, Derek stood. "Then we don't run." Valari looked at him, unsure what he meant. He moved to the supply locker, opened it, pulled out the emergency flare beacon, the one Maddox had left behind. "I sent a signal. He comes back. We leave clean, on our terms. You trust he'll come? He owes me. And if the enforcers come before then?" Derek checked his weapon, chambered around, and set it on the table. "Then we protect each other." That night, the power in the settlement went out. Valari sat on the floor beside the window, wrapped in a blanket, while Derek stood near the door, listening. They spoke little, but the silence between them had changed again. It wasn't fear. It wasn't exhaustion. It was shared purpose. Close to midnight, she whispered, "I used to think strength meant staying composed, never breaking, never asking. And now, I think strength is deciding not to run." Derek stepped over and knelt beside her. The emergency lantern bathed them both in soft light. Her face looked calm, steady. He brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't move away. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore." Valari reached up and placed her hand on his. Her touch was firm, not hesitant. "I know." Outside, footsteps echoed in the street. Distant, searching. Inside, two fugitives sat beside one another, and neither moved. They had made their decision. They wouldn't run again. The sound of boots on gravel broke the stillness just before dawn. Derek opened his eyes instantly. He'd only dozed off in the chair for a few minutes, rifle in hand, fully clothed. Valari was already awake. She sat upright against the wall, her injured legs stretched out, breathing slow but steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They both heard it. Multiple sets of footsteps. Cautious, deliberate, closing in. Derek stood and crossed to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough. 3 figures moved through the dust, 2 with rifles slung across their chests, one holding a handheld scanner. They weren't uniformed military, local enforcement, just armed enough to be dangerous and confident enough to assume no one would stop them. Valari's voice was calm. "He didn't come." Derek turned. "He will." She looked at him for a long second. "If he doesn't, then we hold the line." He moved quickly, securing the entry. The barricade wasn't much, but it would give them a few seconds, maybe more if they used the narrow sight lines. He handed Valari a compact pistol from the supply locker. She took it without hesitation. The knock came. A hard rap, not a request. A warning. "Open the door," someone shouted from outside. We know she's in there. Valari stood now, bracing herself against the table. Her voice was even. You don't have to do this. Derek glanced at her. I already did. The knock came again, followed by the metallic buzz of a cutting torch being lit. Then, a roar overhead. Engines. They both looked up as the low, unmistakable thunder of a ship passed directly above the building. A sonic boom rattled the window panes. Outside, the enforcers ducked instinctively. Derek ripped the door open. Maddox's shuttle dropped from the sky like a hammer, kicking up a wall of dust and noise. Its landing gear hit the dirt 20 meters from the front door, ramp already descending before it touched ground. Derek didn't hesitate. He grabbed Valari by the waist and lifted her across the threshold. She didn't resist. The pain in her leg flared, but she bit it down and held onto him tightly as he sprinted across the open yard. Behind them, the enforcers scrambled. One raised his weapon. Derek spun mid-run, fired a burst, and kept moving. Maddox's voice echoed from the ramp. Move your ass, Vance. They reached the ramp just as the enforcers regained their footing. The shuttle's turrets powered up and fired a warning burst, shredding the dirt in front of the group. No one followed. Inside the ship, Derek set Valari down on the med bench and collapsed next to her, chest heaving. Maddox sealed the hatch. I told you 1 week. You're late, Derek said. You're welcome. The shuttle lifted fast, too fast. G-forces pressed them into their seats. Valari winced, but kept her eyes locked on Derek. He reached over and took her hand. This time, she gripped his back. As the planet shrank beneath them and the stars opened up ahead, neither of them spoke for a while. Eventually, Maddox's voice came through the intercom again. I've got a quiet system lined up, unpatrolled. You two can vanish there if that's still the plan. Derek looked at Valari. It is. She nodded slowly. I don't want to hide anymore, but I do want to start over. So do I. They didn't talk about the war after that, or Earth Command, or her sister. Those pieces still existed, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they talked about what came next. They would build something in the quiet. Not a mission, not a survival plan. A home. Together. And for the first time since Zorathian, 5 burned, Valari slept without fear. Derek watched her for a long time, then leaned his head back and closed his eyes, knowing this time, finally, he had made the right call. The past was behind them. The future was theirs.